Hey everyone! So today's video is going to be different from others. We're going to be talking about people who went hiking in Appalachia expecting a normal trip, but things went bad fast when sudden snowstorms rolled in. These are the experiences where people get lost, the weather turns on them, and the mountains don't let them leave so easily. If you guys enjoy this type of stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want more videos like this. Alright. Let's get into some hiking horror stories. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me and a part of the Appalachian Trail I hadn't touched before. I left early Friday morning and parked near a trailhead just outside a little place called Whistler's Bend. Forecast looked fine. Cold, sure, it was January, but dry and stable. I checked 3 different weather sites the night before, just to be sure. All of them said the same thing, partly cloudy, no snow, temps in the low 20s. I even double-checked at a gas station on the way up. The guy behind the counter just grunted and said, "You should be good." So I started up the trail that morning in high spirits. Crisp air, snow-dusted ground, but no real accumulation, not a soul around. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. That first stretch was peaceful in that rare kind of way you only get in the winter woods. No insects, no chatter, just wind and boots crunching frost. I made good time, set up camp near an old clearing by what looked like the ruins of a fire tower. I found a decent patch to pitch the tent and boiled water for one of those dehydrated pouch dinners. I didn't stay up long. Night hits quick in the mountains that time of year. I was zipped in and half asleep before 7. Sometime during the night, the wind picked up. Just the usual mountain gusts at first. Nothing out of the ordinary. I remember waking up once to the sound of the tent fabric snapping a bit, but it didn't bother me much. It was the kind of noise you expect. I tightened the lines and went back to sleep. The next morning, the air had a bite to it, but the sky was still mostly clear. I packed up, ate a cold granola bar, and got moving. I was aiming to cross a ridgeline by midday before descending toward a marked shelter a couple miles south. That was the plan anyway. But as I started across the ridge, I saw something shift in the sky, clouds, thick and low, moving in fast from the north. They looked wrong, too dense, too sudden. I'd seen fast weather before, but this felt like something else. 10 minutes later, it started snowing. Just a few flakes at first, barely noticeable. Then it hit hard. Within an hour, visibility dropped to almost nothing. My footprints disappeared behind me like they were never there. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my face, pulled my hood up, and tried to keep my bearings. Compass in hand, I aimed south. I kept telling myself the shelter couldn't be far. If I could find it, I'd be fine. But the deeper I went, the less sure I felt. The snow got heavier. My legs were pushing through knee-deep drifts by then, and every tree started to look the same. No trail markers. No signs, just white. That's when I saw the cabin. It wasn't the lean-to from the map. This was a full structure, old but intact, tucked back in a tight cluster of evergreens, almost hidden unless you were right on top of it. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking just a little in the wind. It looked abandoned, but it also looked like shelter. And in that moment, that was enough. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was dark and smelled like wet pine and something older, like mildew and dirt left to stew for years. But it was dry. Solid. The kind of dry that instantly makes you realize how wet and cold you are. I closed the door behind me and took stock. The room was bare. One open space, maybe 15 by 20 feet, a stone fireplace against the far wall, a broken cot leaning at an angle in the corner, a warped wooden table with some rusted tools scattered across it. No signs of life, no gear, no recent use, just abandonment. I shook the snow off my coat, set my pack down, and fired up my little stove to make soup. I sat on the floor against the wall, trying to get some warmth back into my hands. I remember the silence, how complete it was. Like the snow had swallowed up all sound, even inside. Then I heard footsteps. Not outside. Above me, 3 slow, deliberate steps across the ceiling. I froze. My first thought was that maybe I'd misjudged. Maybe someone else was already here when I came in. But I hadn't seen any other footprints. No one had followed me. I was sure of it. I looked up. There was a square opening in the ceiling. A loft, I guessed. No ladder. Just a cutout above the center of the room. I stared at it for a while, listening. The steps stopped. Then came this faint scrape, like someone shifting their weight, dragging a boot slightly across wood. That was it. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I sat there, hands clenched, heart thudding in my ears, just waiting for another sound. Nothing came. After maybe 20 minutes, I stood up slowly, moved the table underneath the loft, climbed up carefully, just high enough to get my eyes over the edge. Empty. Just old beams, cobwebs, and dust. Nothing up there. No footprints. No sleeping bag, no sign that anyone or anything had ever been there. I climbed back down, tried to convince myself it was stress, cold, maybe the wind playing tricks through gaps in the boards. I tried to believe that. That night, I laid out my sleeping bag near the fireplace and tried to sleep. I woke up sometime in the early hours, freezing. The fire was out. Just blackened logs and a faint curl of smoke. I sat up and immediately noticed the door. It was open. Only a few inches, but it had been shut, and I had wedged it. I was certain. I got up, stepped over to it, and shut it again, this time jamming a piece of broken chair under the handle. My breath was clouding in front of me. My hands were shaking. Then I heard it. A whistle, not a melody. Just one long, low note, sharp and steady, like someone calling a dog. It came again, closer. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack, yanked the chair leg free, and bolted out the door. The snow was lighter now, but everything was quiet, too quiet, no tracks. No wind. Just me and the sound of my boots crunching frozen ground as I tore back into the trees, heading in any direction that wasn't toward that cabin. I don't know how long I ran. At some point, I tripped and hit the snow hard. I stayed there, curled up beside a frozen stream, shaking from cold and exhaustion. My headlamp had gone out. I could barely move. That's when I saw him. Standing on the other side of the stream, maybe 50 feet away. Tall, still, wearing a brown coat that looked soaked and heavy with snow. I couldn't make out his face fully in the low light, but I saw his mouth. He was smiling. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. I blinked, and he was gone. I followed the stream south until I reached a ranger outpost sometime around midday. I was half frozen. Couldn't feel my hands. They called an ambulance and took me to a clinic in Lindell. I stayed 2 nights. The frostbite wasn't bad enough to lose anything, but it was close. I told the rangers about the cabin, tried to point it out on a map. They looked confused, said there hadn't been any standing shelters in that part of the forest for over a decade. I've been on a few hikes since then, always with other people, never in winter, and I won't go back to that part of the trail. I was 30 when this happened, early December, right after everything kind of fell apart all at once. My girlfriend had left about 3 weeks before that. After that, the silence on my phone felt a little too loud, so I planned a 2-day hike out on a ridge trail I'd done once before in the fall. It's in the eastern Appalachians, not too far from the North Carolina border. The trailhead was already covered in a thin crust of snow when I parked. The first leg of the hike felt good, cold but manageable. I passed a group of hunters in orange near the base, 3 of them, older guys with worn rifles. We nodded at each other, no words. After that, it was just me and the trail. I made decent time. About 10 miles in, I stopped to camp near an old Forest Service sign that I remembered from a previous trip. It was mostly rust now, slanted in the dirt but still visible if you knew where to look. I remembered thinking it looked like a half-buried headstone the last time I was out there. That first night, the wind picked up hard. My tent shook, the nylon snapping against the poles like a loose sail. It wasn't snowing heavily yet, just little flurries that tapped against the fabric like static. I bundled up and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up in short jolts. At some point, I stepped out of the tent to pee. That's when I saw them boot prints, not mine, too wide in the toe box, and the tread didn't match. They came from behind a tree about 20 feet away and ended just a few feet from the back of my tent. They didn't go past it, just stopped. No return path, just an arrival. I stood there in the dark, staring at them, one hand still at my side, the other halfway to my knife. The wind whistled past, carrying little flakes of snow sideways. I looked around, scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. No movement. No lights. No sound beyond the wind and the occasional crack of a frozen branch. I tried to shake it off, told myself someone must have passed by earlier, maybe checking the trail, but the prints were too clean. No drift over them, no signs of melting or age. And the way they just ended behind the tree, like whoever made them was standing there watching, that stuck with me. I zipped up the tent tight when I got back in, slept with the knife inside my sleeping bag pressed against my thigh. I didn't really sleep much at all. By morning, the snow had thickened. Not a full storm, but enough to blur the trail. The trees were blanketed. Everything looked soft and unfamiliar. I packed quickly, figuring I'd move on to the lean-to shelter at the next ridge point. I'd been there once during the summer. A stone structure built into the slope, 3 walls and a roof, open on one side. Decent windbreak. Better than a tent if the weather kept turning. As I climbed, things started to get weird. The trail markings vanished under the snow. At first it was just inconvenient. Then it started getting disorienting. I kept checking my GPS, but it was lagging, showing me looping paths when I knew I hadn't turned. I'd walk straight for 30 minutes and check it again, only to see my path curling back on itself like a confused spiral. The trees didn't help. Every direction looked the same, no undergrowth, just tall, white, dusted trunks rising into gray. Then I saw the boot prints again, parallel to mine, deeper, like someone heavier was walking just beside me, keeping pace. Sometimes they veered slightly inward, then back out again, like they were drifting closer, then pulling away. I stopped walking, but the silence settled. There was no sound. No birds, no branches creaking. Just that muted hush that only comes when the snow absorbs everything, and under that, something else. A low sound. Not quite a voice. Not quite wind. It reminded me of someone breathing through a congested nose, slow and muffled, like they were trying not to be noticed. I told myself it was just the wind cutting through the trees. I picked up my pace. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the shelter. It was exactly where it should have been, which felt like a miracle by then. The front was half blocked by a drift, but the stone walls held. Inside, it was dark, cold, but at least I could see the ground. I cleared some space, built a small fire in the center pit. My hands were stiff. I could barely unscrew my thermos lid. One of my boots had started to split along the sole, and snow had soaked through the edge. I took off the wet sock and wrapped my foot in a plastic bag. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. No voice on the weather band. No updates. Just that crackling noise like insects in a paper bag. The emergency beacon blinked red, then green, then back to red again. I tapped it against my knee. Nothing changed. I set it down on a flat rock and watched the light blink like it couldn't decide what to do. The light outside dimmed quickly. I ate a protein bar and drank some of the now cool broth. Then I heard it. Footsteps, crunching snow. Slow, rhythmic. I froze. The steps moved around the outside of the shelter. I couldn't see past the stone arch, but I heard the sound of something dragging, like cloth or canvas over snow. Not boots. Not wheels. Something being pulled. I crouched low and waited. Then I saw it, just the edge. Something pale, taller than the shelter entrance, hunched low but not crawling. It moved awkwardly, like the joints weren't bending the right way. It was covered in something fur-like, maybe cloth, crusted with frost. There was no visible face, just a curved dark void under the weight of whatever it was wearing. It stopped at the entrance, didn't come inside, just stood there. I stayed perfectly still. Then it reached behind itself, slow, almost mechanical. It pulled out a coat. My coat, the same one I was wearing. Same torn sleeve, Same off-color patch on the back where I'd spilled epoxy glue last spring. It laid the coat gently at the threshold, like an offering. Then it waited. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I stared at the shape until my eyes burned. Eventually, minutes, maybe longer, it turned and left, dragging something behind it that made that soft, dry, whispering sound, like rope over canvas or hair. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going and sat with my back to the wall, knife in hand, every muscle wired. I heard it again, maybe twice farther off, always circling. By dawn, the storm had lightened. The coat was still there, sitting just where it had been placed, bone dry. I picked it up. The pockets were full. Inside, my old work ID from a warehouse job I hadn't thought about in years. A photo of me and Miles, when we were maybe 10, grinning in front of a lake in Virginia. And a car key to the Honda I sold last year. I turned around and left. By nightfall, I found the trailhead. My car was there, iced over but untouched. No other vehicles. No prints. I drove home in silence. Didn't stop once. I dumped the coat in a gas station bin and smashed the radio with a rock before tossing it too. Haven't been back to that ridge since. I was 31 when it happened. There's this stretch of trail near Dyer, West Virginia, technically part of the old Long Ridge. I found out about it from a guy I met pumping gas in Laurel Junction. He had one of those neon orange maintenance vests on, dirt under his nails, smelled like diesel and pine sap. Told me there was a part of the ridge nobody bothers with anymore, that it hadn't been cleared in decades. I drove up early and started hiking by 10. The first stretch was what you'd expect from a forgotten trail, faded blazes, thorny undergrowth. That first night, I pitched camp near a frost-lined stream. Found an old hunting shack half swallowed by moss and rot. Its roof had caved in, but the foundation was still good enough to keep the wind off. I cooked a small dinner and read by headlamp for a while. When I turned in, the woods were completely silent. By the second morning, the cold had dug in for good. I could feel it in my knees when I stood. Even the air had changed, thin, sharp, like breathing through wool. I broke camp and kept climbing. The trail narrowed fast, pines and spruce pressing close, like they were trying to squeeze me back downhill. I ducked under limbs crusted with ice, stepped over blown-out roots, and that's when I saw the footprints. Just one set. Deep, uneven, not recent, but not old either. I figured someone had come through ahead of me. Happens. But when I looked closer, something felt off. The prints just started. There weren't any leading up to them, not from either direction. It was like whoever made them had been dropped there mid-stride and walked on. I kept going, trying to make sense of it. Maybe wind had erased the earlier steps. Maybe there was a snow pocket I hadn't noticed that had filled in part of the trail. I came up with a dozen explanations, none of them satisfying. Around midday, the sky shifted. Not darker, just blank. A smooth, dead gray, like someone had rolled a sheet over the sun. I was about to stop and eat when the first snowflakes fell. Small, dry, almost dusty. I've hiked in snow plenty of times, so I didn't freak out, just pulled my hood tight and moved quicker. But the snow didn't stay light for long. Within an hour, the trail was gone. Completely gone. Buried under a layer of powder so clean it looked fake. I couldn't see more than a dozen feet in any direction. Trees blurred into one another. I started doubling back, aiming for that old broken signpost I'd passed earlier, a solid marker to reorient myself. But the snow wasn't acting normal. It didn't just fall, it gathered, clung to me. My sleeves, my pack, even my tent roll, like the air itself was sticky. By the time I found a dense cluster of trees and set up my emergency tarp, it felt less like I was avoiding the storm and more like I was hiding from something. I used the trunks to block most of the wind and crawled under the tarp. I had water, protein bars, a decent sleeping mat. I told myself I could wait it out. That night was a kind of quiet I hadn't experienced before. Not peaceful, just empty. The wind didn't whistle or gust. It just knocked. like fists against a door somewhere far off. Every so often it would sound like something moved, but nothing ever did. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up freezing. One corner of the tarp had pulled loose, and snow had drifted halfway onto my legs. My boots were damp. I got out to fix the line, and that's when I saw the prints again. Right beside my shelter, not mine. Not fresh either. They were already filling in, half erased by the new snow. But they were clear enough. The exact same boot pattern I'd seen earlier. Same depth, same uneven left step. Just standing there, facing the tarp. And then gone. I didn't sleep after that. Just lay there with my hat pulled low, eyes flicking to the shadows outside. I kept telling myself it was another hiker, someone who passed through. But there hadn't been any light, no breathing, no footsteps. And the trail, it didn't exist anymore. At first light, I broke camp and pushed downhill. I figured if I followed the drop, I'd hit a service road eventually. About 20 minutes into the descent, I spotted something odd through the trees, a shape where there shouldn't be one. A structure. It was an old fire tower, rotting, leaning at an angle like it had been caught mid-fall. The ladder was missing, but there was a door at the base. That's not normal. Fire towers don't have basements, but the door was real, wooden, reinforced with metal strips. I should have walked past, I really should have, but I didn't. The door wasn't locked, opened easy, just creaked like something old and damp. There were stairs going down, maybe 10 steps, leading to a concrete room. Looked like a storage spot. Crates stacked against the walls, shelves rusted over, a long metal locker on its side, no signs of life. But the air down there was wrong, not musty. Not cold, just still. No smell, no movement, like the room hadn't breathed in years. I took one step in, then another. My light caught dust hanging midair, not falling, suspended. Then the door slammed shut behind me. No wind, no vibration, no warning. I was back at the top of the stairs in less than 2 seconds. Shoulder checked the door open and sprinted. Didn't stop until my legs burned. My lungs hurt from the cold. I couldn't explain it and I didn't want to. I just wanted to get out. But the snow didn't let up. In fact, it got heavier. My eyes stung trying to look forward. I found a cedar tree and rigged the tarp around it in a tight U-shape. Sat with my back to the trunk, wrapped in my jacket, and tried to stay warm. That's when I heard the whistling. It wasn't a tune, just one note, low, drawn out, like someone exhaling through a metal pipe. It started far off. I told myself it was wind catching the trees, but it didn't shift or rise or fall. It just got closer. I lay flat and didn't move. Not a sound from my body. The whistling passed behind me. No footsteps. No breathing. Just that note, humming like something with lungs that didn't need to breathe. When morning came, the snow was up to my waist. I tried moving again. Tried following the slope, but the landscape had changed. Rocks I'd marked were gone. Fallen logs had shifted. Trees leaned in directions they hadn't the day before. At one point, I came across a trail of boot prints, mine, but they were coming toward me. That's when it hit me. I wasn't lost. I was looping. By dusk, I found a clearing that made my stomach drop. Same dead fire pit, same split log I'd sat on that first night. I'd spent almost 2 full days walking in a perfect circle. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat with a fire going and the knife in my hand. No sounds, no movement. But the whistle came again, long, steady, threading through the smoke like it was part of the air itself. At first light, I packed everything and climbed the ridge above camp and left. I'd been working nonstop at this marketing firm in Asheville, and between the screens, meetings, and the constant low hum of fluorescent lights, I just hit a wall. One Tuesday morning, I stared at the same spreadsheet for 40 minutes without typing a single word. I remember pushing my chair back, walking to the break room, and staring out the window like something in the woods behind the parking lot was going to give me the answers. By the end of the day, I'd requested 4 days off. Told them I needed a breather, which, to be fair, I did. I'm not much of a planner when it comes to time off. I didn't book flights or anything. I just packed some basic hiking gear, rented a little SUV with decent tires, and decided I'd try a short solo hike on the Appalachian Trail. Just a section, not the whole thing. Something manageable. I figured I'd hike for a few hours, clear my head, maybe sleep one night in a cheap cabin if I got too cold. That was the whole plan. I chose a stretch that ran near the Georgia-North Carolina border, not too far from a town called Winstead. I'd heard it was beautiful in the winter, and more importantly, it wasn't heavily trafficked that time of year. I wanted quiet. I needed to hear my own thoughts again without someone's Slack message chiming in every 5 minutes. The forecast said, light snow, nothing major. I had a decent coat, boots that were broken in, a thermal blanket, and enough snacks to last a weekend. I left the SUV near a gravel pull-off just after 10 in the morning and started walking. I had a small day pack with water, a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and a little emergency kit I'd thrown together the night before. I figured I wouldn't even need most of it. This wasn't meant to be a survival trip. The trail started out fine, mostly quiet, save for the occasional rustle of something small moving under brush or the sound of my boots packing snow down. I passed a couple of old tree markers, faded orange paint on bark. Nothing too official, but they helped keep me on track. I didn't really have a destination in mind. That was part of the appeal. I'd just go until I felt done. By around 2:30, the sky started to spit light snow. Nothing thick, just lazy little flakes drifting down. I stopped on a ridge to sip the last of my coffee and took in the view. Everything was soft and gray and quiet in a way that felt almost unreal, like the world had hit pause. Then I noticed the wind shift. It got sharp, fast, like someone had opened a freezer right in front of me. I started walking back. Except, that's when I realized I had no idea how far I'd come, or if I was actually going the right way. It hadn't seemed like I'd gone that far out, but when I looked behind me, nothing looked familiar. The ridge was bare on one side and thick with tangled trees on the other. The trail itself was mostly covered now, and the paint markers had all but vanished under the snow. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I tried the little GPS clip-on I'd borrowed from a friend. No connection. It just blinked red. I held it up, turned it in a few directions, even climbed up a little to get better elevation. Still nothing. I picked what I thought was the right direction and started walking, but something felt off. The slope was rising, not falling, and the trees on either side didn't match what I remembered. I was sure I'd been heading downhill earlier. I told myself maybe I just looped a bit, that it'd all make sense in a few minutes. Then the snow picked up, hard. It started coming in sideways. My scarf iced over almost immediately. I had to squint just to see a few feet ahead. I wrapped my coat tighter and moved faster, hoping I'd find something, anything that looked familiar. That's when I spotted it. Off to the right, just past a small dip in the slope, was what looked like a wooden structure. I slid down the incline, boots skidding a little, and pushed through a thicket of frozen undergrowth. The building was small, more of a shack than anything. 3 walls, a slanted roof, looked like it hadn't been used in years. A hunting blind or maybe an old ranger shelter. I ducked inside and sat back against the far wall, just glad to be out of the wind for a minute. It was cramped. My knees pressed against the opposite wall if I leaned back. The roof had holes, but at least the snow wasn't hitting me directly anymore. I pulled out the thermal blanket and wrapped it around my legs, trying to rub warmth back into my hands. That's when I noticed the carvings. The wood around me was covered in names. Dozens of them, scratched into the beams and slats at every angle. Some were old, almost unreadable, worn into the wood. Others were recent. You could still see the pale yellow of the fresh shavings. Most had 2 dates next to them, all of them winter months, and all of them within the same year. I stared at them, confused at first. Then it clicked. Birth and death. It was the only explanation that made sense. Whoever these people were, they'd all died the same year they were out here. I sat still for a while, Thought maybe it was some kind of strange local memorial, maybe to mark people who had died hiking that part of the trail. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to let my brain run wild with snow paranoia. Then I saw a name that stopped everything cold. Joran. No last name. Just that. And underneath it, scratched in what looked like fresh lines, was today's date. I sat there too long, staring at it. Joran isn't exactly John or Mike. It's not a name you see on souvenir license plates. I've met maybe 2 other people in my life with that name. Both were older. One was a deacon at the church my parents used to drag me to. I stood up so fast I nearly hit my head on the roof beam. My heart was hammering in my chest. Not metaphorically, like I felt every beat, like it was vibrating in my ears. I backed out of the shelter into the full force of the snow, no idea which way I'd come from anymore. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe 50 feet away, standing under a tree. He had on a ripped flannel coat, jeans, thick beard matted with frost. He wasn't moving, just watching. I waved. Nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. Then, calmly, he stepped behind the tree. I moved toward him. I didn't want to, but I did. I told myself, maybe he was a hunter, or a local who knew the area, someone who could help. But when I reached the tree, he was gone. No tracks in the snow, nothing. I turned around, panicked now, and that's when I saw it. Another shelter, just like the first, same size, same shape, same warped support beam, same name scratched into the top plank, Joran. Same exact date. I hadn't looped. I knew I hadn't. I'd moved in a straight line. I didn't go in. I didn't even slow down. I just ran. I slid down the slope, boots slipping on packed snow and hidden roots. My legs were numb, breath catching in my throat, lungs burning. I didn't care if I twisted an ankle. I just kept going. After what felt like half an hour, I stumbled into a clearing and saw a fence. Rusted barbed wire, and beyond it, a squat utility building with a leaning pole beside it. I'd passed it on my way in. I threw myself over the fence, tore my coat, scraped my thigh, didn't stop. Just kept moving until I saw the SUV. Still there, half buried in snow, but right where I'd left it. I climbed in, started the engine without even brushing the snow off the windshield. The tires spun for a second before they found traction. I didn't care. I just drove. I didn't go to the cabin I'd reserved. I drove 20 miles south to a gas station with bright yellow lights and plastic-wrapped sandwiches and parked there for almost an hour with the heat cranked and my hands under my thighs, trying to stop them from shaking. That night, I called the ranger station, told them I'd seen an old shelter on that trail twice. The guy on the phone sounded nice, but confused. Said no shelters had existed on that stretch in years, not since the 70s. I was 22 when it happened. I picked a low-traffic trail near Brookvale State Park, tucked into the eastern edge of Kentucky. I'd done parts of the Appalachian Trail before, but always with a group. This time, I wanted something simple, something predictable. No conversations, no one else's pace to match, just me and my thoughts. I figured it would help clear my head after a semester that left me completely burned out. I picked the trail carefully. Nothing steep, nothing remote. Weather looked good cold, but dry, and I brought everything I might need. I packed layers, energy bars, 2 flashlights, extra batteries, a compass, my emergency radio. Checked in with the park station on the way in. I wasn't being reckless. I was doing everything right. The hike started off normal. It was around 10 in the morning. Cold but not biting, somewhere in the mid-30s, with the kind of light dusting of snow that doesn't slow you down, just quiets everything. The ground was frozen solid and pine needles crunched under my boots. The trees were mostly conifers, standing tall and heavy with frost. I passed one couple on their way out, maybe in their 50s. They smiled, looked comfortable, didn't mention anything strange. I figured I was good to go. After they disappeared behind a bend, I didn't see another soul. Not that unusual. It was January. Most people had the sense to stay inside with cocoa and central heating. About 3 miles in, I reached a little rock overhang that made a decent place to rest. I sat down, peeled open a protein bar, and stared out into the trees while I chewed. Everything was still. I remember thinking it was too still, not eerie, just weirdly perfect. No birds, no creaks. Just the sound of my own chewing and the occasional squeak of my jacket when I moved. Then the snow started. Fast. I swear. When I sat down, it was clear. 10 minutes later, it was like someone had thrown a white sheet over the forest. Sideways snow, not gentle flakes, thin, fast, and slanted. I stood up, zipped my coat all the way to my chin, and adjusted my hat. I figured I'd just head back and beat the weather, but the trail wasn't where it should have been. The trees looked familiar but slightly off. The packed-down path was gone. I expected snow to cover it, sure, but not like this. The line of the trail had just disappeared, like no one had ever walked it. Still, I had a compass, and I knew the route. I figured if I stuck to the same general heading, I'd intersect the path again. So I started walking, eyes scanning for tree markers, anything man-made. That's when the light started to flatten. It wasn't dimming, not exactly. The sky was still that gray-white winter tone, but suddenly everything seemed the same color. The trees, the snow, even my breath, it all sort of melted into one pale blur. Distance got hard to judge. The forest didn't look deep anymore. Everything was just close, like a room with the walls pushed in. After maybe 20 minutes of hiking that way, I realized I hadn't seen a single landmark I remembered. No switchbacks, no fallen log with moss. I'd been watching for that one in particular, but it never showed. I pulled out my emergency radio. Just static. Not shocking. I wasn't counting on it, but still. No signal on my phone either, which I expected. But the reality of it still landed heavy in my chest. Then I spotted a sign. It was barely hanging onto a crooked nail slapped up on the side of a tree, white paint flaking off. Just one word, shelter, and a left-pointing arrow. The lettering looked hand-painted, old, like it hadn't been touched in decades. That was the first moment I felt the unease crawl up the back of my neck. There weren't supposed to be shelters on this trail. I'd memorized the map. Nothing marked, nothing unofficial. But I was already off track, and standing still was starting to feel worse than moving. So I followed the arrow. The shelter was exactly what the sign promised. A tiny one-room cabin tucked into a dip between trees. It looked like something a ranger might use once a decade, maybe to store tools. Wooden planks, tin roof, door hanging slightly open. I knocked and called out, mostly for formality. No answer. Inside it was surprisingly tidy. Not just clean like suspiciously clean. The cot in the corner looked untouched. There was no dust on the stove or the logs stacked next to it. No cobwebs in the corners. Even the floorboards looked freshly swept. But there was nothing personal. No mugs, no coat, no gear. Just this sterile emptiness that made my skin prickle. I sat on the cot and tried to warm up. The snow outside was quieter now, falling slower, but it hadn't stopped. The air had gone dead still. Not peaceful, just drained. On the back wall above the stove, someone had scratched a long list of numbers into the wood. At first I thought it was graffiti, maybe measurements or serial numbers. But they looked like dates, decades worth of them. Some had initials next to them, scratched in smaller. Others had been crossed out. Some were just left blank. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. The screen went black the second I opened the camera. No battery warning, no glitch. Just dead. I stared at it for a second, then set it down on the cot. My heart wasn't racing yet, but my chest was tight. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe the cold killed it. Maybe the battery was bad. Whatever. I still had a flashlight and my compass, so I decided I'd rest, wait a bit, then head out again. But when I glanced out the window well, where a window should have been, just a rectangular hole with wooden shutters, the trail I'd walked in on was gone, not covered. Gone. I stepped outside. The trees near the cabin didn't match the ones I'd passed before. The shapes were different. The bark was peeling in long strips, and the branches were thin, bare, and bone-like. I tried to retrace my steps anyway. Picked a direction, walked 10 minutes. Nothing changed. Eventually, I turned back. The air felt thick, not foggy, just dense, like moving through cold syrup. Back in the cabin, I checked the wall again. 3 new numbers had been scratched at the bottom of the list. One of them was today's date. The other 2 were from earlier that week. All 3 had the same initials beside them, mine. I don't know how long I stood there staring at them. My breath felt too loud in my ears. My hands started shaking, but not from the cold. That was when the first real wave of fear hit me. Not the slow kind, the hard kind. The kind that makes your body feel too small to hold it. I packed everything I could in under a minute. Threw my compass in my jacket pocket, didn't even check directions. Just walked, fast. The snowflakes weren't melting when they touched me anymore. They just hung there, sticking to my jacket, my hat, even my eyelashes. Like they'd been dipped in glue. The air didn't move. I couldn't hear my own footsteps. Then, in the distance, shapes. I thought they were people at first, skinny figures between the trees. I shouted once, loud, desperate. They didn't move. They didn't even turn. When I got closer, I realized they weren't people. Not quite. They looked like outlines, blurry, like chalk drawings in the air. Their edges smudged and soft, like they'd been erased halfway. I backed away and just picked another direction. That's when I saw another cabin, same build, same stove, same cot. For a second I thought I'd circle back, but inside there were only 2 dates scratched into the wall, both blank next to them. I kept walking. The next cabin had 5 dates. The one after that, just 1. They weren't the same cabin. They were different, slightly off. The way the shutters hung, the number of logs, the tilt of the roof, but the layout was always the same. I passed 6 more. Each one made me feel smaller. And then, finally, I smelled something sharp and out of place. Smoke. Real smoke. Like burning cedar. I followed it. Ran, actually. I didn't care what it meant. Over a rise, I found a gravel road. Crude, uneven, but real. It led to a highway. I almost cried when I saw the road sign. I flagged down the first car that passed. The man driving didn't answer when I asked what day it was. He just looked at me and said, "You okay? You look like you've been in a wreck." At the hospital, they told me I'd been missing for 3 days. After that, I moved out of Kentucky and never went back. That morning started like any other hike. I parked my truck at the base of an old service road near Briar Hollow, a patch of thick forest right along the Tennessee-Virginia border that doesn't see much foot traffic. It's not marked like the more popular trails. I'd been meaning to check it out for months. That day just felt right. Forecast was clear across the board. I even checked 3 different sites the night before. I packed like usual: water, layers, backup socks, my old headlamp, a couple flares, and a compass that had never failed me. I even brought one of those weatherproof trail maps, just in case my phone crapped out. I've done solo hikes for years. I don't mess around with safety. About 90 minutes in, I passed this half-collapsed stone wall buried in brush. That's when I noticed the wind had shifted. It had been still until then, but suddenly there was this steady push. Not strong, just enough to rustle the treetops. Then came the snow. It started light, just a few flakes hitting my jacket, but it didn't match anything I'd seen on the forecast. I looked up and the sky had gone totally gray. Not cloudy, not overcast. Just gray, flat and heavy. I figured it would pass, but it didn't. Within 20 minutes, it was coming down hard. Thick, wet flakes that stuck to my gear, weighed down branches, turned the trail into slush. It wasn't flurries. It was one of those snows that feels like it's trying to smother the woods. I decided to turn back. I'd gone far enough, and the trail was already getting hard to follow. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were behind me, in the direction I'd just come from, but they weren't mine. That much was immediately obvious. I have a pretty standard gait. These were spaced further apart. The treads looked different, less depth at the toe, deeper at the heel. Someone taller, probably. And moving confidently. No hesitation, no dragging steps, just clean, even strides. I stopped and stared at them longer than I should have. There hadn't been anyone else out there all morning. I would have seen or heard them. The forest was dead quiet before the snow. I followed the prints for maybe 100 yards. Then they left the trail and disappeared into the trees on the right side. Not in a wandering way, more like whoever it was had a specific place they were going. Straight line, clean entry. That's when I pulled out my compass. Just to reorient myself, maybe figure out where the old creek bed was. I remembered crossing it earlier. But the needle kept drifting. It would swing to north, pause, then slowly pull toward west and hover there. I moved away from my pack, held the compass flat in open space. Same result. No signal on my phone, not even a flicker. I tried opening my GPS app anyway, just to mark my last known coordinates. It froze, then crashed. I wasn't panicking, not yet. I still remembered the terrain well enough, so I started to backtrack manually. I remembered passing a rotted log right at a fork in the path. Figured I'd find that, then work my way back to the service road, except the log wasn't there anymore. I stood in the exact spot where I remembered it being. There should have been at least a lump under the snow, or an indentation. Nothing, just flat ground. Undisturbed. Then came the sound. It wasn't a voice or an animal, just snow being compressed. One slow, deliberate step at a time. Somewhere up ahead, hidden in the trees, I ducked behind a pine, heart racing now, and stayed perfectly still. The steps didn't get closer, but they didn't fade either. They moved parallel, then curved, like whoever it was circling. Once the sound drifted off, I made a decision. No more trail. I was going downhill, toward where the creek should have been. If I could find it, I could follow it all the way to the access road. I knew the terrain well enough. Even if I had to bushwhack through brush, I'd find it eventually. I moved steadily for another 30 minutes, give or take. The woods got denser, terrain sloppier. I should have heard water by then. I should have at least seen a dip in the land. But there was nothing, no creek. No hint of water, just more trees. More snow, more silence. Except for the footprints. They kept showing up. Always ahead of me. Never leading in from the sides, never crossing paths, just appearing in front of wherever I was headed. And they weren't walking prints anymore. Sometimes just two impressions, spaced too far apart for walking. Like someone had jumped, or landed. I stopped under an overhang, a shallow rock ledge jutting out from the slope. Just wanted a break. My fingers were stiff. I fumbled with a flare. First one fizzled out, second sparked, burned weakly, then died. I held on to the last one. Then I heard it again. Not footsteps this time, something lighter. Like taps. Directly above me. I glanced up. Nothing. No movement. No snow falling. Just the ledge. But I noticed something at the edge of the rock. 5 handprints, pressed into the snow. Long fingers. Too long, almost delicate. And the snow around them had been cleared first, brushed away clean, like someone had prepared the spot before placing their hands there. I backed away slowly. Then I ran. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just ran. Trees blurred past. Branches scratched my arms, and once I slipped and slid down a muddy incline, crashing through brush until I landed hard on my shoulder. When I looked up, I was in a clearing. In the middle was the skeleton of some old shack, nothing but collapsed timbers and part of a frame, half covered in snow. No roof, barely a wall standing. Just enough structure to crawl under. I did, not because it felt safe, just because I couldn't stand up anymore. I cracked a hand warmer and curled up near one of the beams. That's when I saw it, a line in the snow, about 20 feet out. Not a print. A drag, like something had been pulled toward the trees. The trail was fresh, no new snow covering it yet, but it just ended, clean, like whatever it was had sunk into the ground. Then came a whistle. Low, 2 notes. A few seconds apart, then nothing. I lit my last flare, the red glow through shadows everywhere. For a second, I saw nothing. Then snow dropped from a branch to my right, just a little puff. No wind. Then another, further left. Like something was moving just outside the ring of light. I backed up until my spine hit one of the beams, held the flare as high as I could, and the snow just stopped, not gradually, just off. Like someone flipped a switch. The flakes mid-air just didn't fall. They hung there for a second, then nothing. The silence was worse than any noise. I left. I didn't look back. Didn't try to make sense of it. I moved downhill as fast as I could, tripping, slipping, using trees for balance. My legs didn't care anymore. My only goal was out. After what felt like forever, could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour, I saw the road. My truck was still there, covered in snow but untouched. No prints around it. No signs anyone or anything had come near. I drove straight to the ranger station. I told them everything I could, though I didn't expect them to believe me. They sent a crew out the next morning. They didn't find anything. Just woods, untouched woods. Since then, I've stopped hiking solo. My brother-in-law, Calden, somehow convinced me to go on a winter hike with him. He was training for a longer through hike in the spring, and I'd been unemployed since Thanksgiving, so a few days in the woods seemed like a decent way to clear my head. I'd hiked parts of southern Appalachia before, but never during winter, and definitely not in January. We headed out on a Tuesday, hoping to dodge other hikers by sticking to weekdays. The forecast had looked boring for days, cold, sure, but clear skies and no surprises. We left the car at some forestry access road outside of Elmsfield and hiked in about 8 miles to this old shelter. Calden swore he'd stayed at once during college. Honestly, I thought it would be a total wreck. But when we finally found it, the thing was in better shape than I expected. Tucked low into a hollow, no signs or markings pointing to it, just a sagging roof with rotted branches piled up top and a crumbled fire ring out front. It didn't look like anyone had used it in years. Still, it cut the wind, and we managed to get a fire going with some pine we dragged down from the hill above. That first night was uneventful, completely quiet. We didn't see a single other person or track the whole day, just us and the cold. Stars looked like they'd been sharpened. We drank a little whiskey, talked about nonsense, and passed out early. The second day is where things got strange. The plan was to do a loop head down one side of the ridge, curve around the base, then come up from the other side and camp at the same shelter. Maybe 12 miles total. Easy stuff. Snow started falling around midday. Light at first, barely noticeable. By the time we were halfway around, it was thick and steady. Not a total whiteout, but it started changing the feel of the trail. Soft edges turned sharp, landmarks got buried. Everything started to look the same. Calden had his GPS watch loaded with the route, and we both had old-school maps and compasses as backup, so we weren't panicking or anything, just moving slower. By the time we made it back to the hollow, it was almost dark. My gloves were damp. Calden had little icicles forming in his beard. That kind of cold where your face feels brittle. That's when we noticed the prints. Fresh boot prints, one set just outside the shelter, big tread, deep impressions. Clearly recent. But we hadn't passed a soul all day. And there weren't any roads or winter trailheads nearby for someone to have come in after us. Even we had to hike a long way in just to get here. Calden thought maybe a hunter had wandered through, but the prints didn't come from down trail. They led from uphill straight down the steep back slope where there's no marked trail. We followed them maybe 20 or 30 yards up the incline, and then they just stopped. Not faded, not covered, just ended. Like someone was walking and then, mid-step, vanished. We didn't talk about it, didn't try to rationalize it. We just turned around, lit another fire, and made dinner like everything was fine. That night, the wind was brutal. Even inside the shelter, it was loud enough that we had to raise our voices to talk. The fire kept sputtering sideways despite the overhang. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It was a crack, not thunder. Wood, close, and not just one. 3 distinct snaps, spaced evenly. like someone out there was breaking frozen limbs in half deliberately. I sat up real slow, listened. Then, nothing. Across the shelter, Calden was already awake. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me like we were both waiting for a second noise to prove it wasn't just a dream. I whispered, "You heard that?" He gave this tiny nod. We didn't move. I think we were both doing that thing where you try not to breathe too loud. Eventually, we both must have drifted off again, out of sheer mental shutdown. By morning, the snow had stopped, and the whole hollow looked frozen solid. Bright sky, sparkling drifts, the kind of silence that feels too heavy, and our firewood was gone. We'd stacked maybe 15 split pieces under the overhang, just enough to dry a bit for breakfast. Now, nothing. Not scattered, not stolen and dropped. Just a perfectly empty spot where the pile had been. Calden suggested maybe an animal dragged them off. But all of it, neatly, without a single print in the snow. I walked around the shelter, circling it like I'd find a trail of crumbs or paw prints or even a broken branch. I found something, but it wasn't that. It was a slip of paper, stuffed into a seam in the stone wall at the back of the shelter. The kind of old yellowed paper that's been sitting for a long time. It had one thing written on it in pencil: Jonas Ridley, 1978. I showed it to Calden. He barely glanced at it, just muttered something about how people leave weird notes in shelters all the time. Probably someone's trail register, he said, and then immediately started packing up. Neither of us said it, but we were both done. No debate, just gear packed tight and boots laced stiff. The hike out felt different. The cold had teeth. The GPS said we were on track, but everything looked unfamiliar, like the woods had shifted slightly in the night. 2 hours in, I spotted a birch tree with a twisted trunk, the same one we'd passed on the way in, but it was on the wrong side of the trail now. At first, I figured I just remembered it wrong. Then it happened again. A boulder with moss only on one side now flipped. Little things, but enough that I knew I wasn't crazy. I told Calden. He didn't respond, didn't even turn around. Just said, "Don't talk about it." So I didn't. We kept moving. No breaks, no talking. And then, about a mile from the road, we passed a tree with something pinned to it. Another slip of paper. This one was new. White, not yellowed. Pinned with a small metal tack. I slowed down and Calden sped up. He didn't look at it, but I did. It had my name on it, my full name, middle initial and all, written in block letters, neat and clean, no date, just the name. I took it down and folded it up without a word. We didn't stop again until we saw Calden's car. He didn't say a word the whole drive back. I didn't either. My hands were locked up from the cold, but I still couldn't stop them from shaking. That was 5 years ago. We haven't been hiking together since. We still see each other at birthdays or barbecues, but that trip never comes up. I was 32 when I decided to take a couple of days off to do a solo hike on the Appalachian Trail. There's this stretch near Bell Ridge, a small, quiet town that barely shows up on most maps, sits right along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. I'd hiked parts of that trail before, but not this particular leg. The forecast looked fine. Cold, yeah, but clear skies with maybe a few flurries overnight. I'd done worse. My gear was solid, nothing fancy, just enough to keep me warm, dry, and caffeinated. I had a thermos full of tea, my little gas stove tucked in my pack, and one of those emergency bivy sacks in case things went sideways. I parked along a gravel turnout, the kind where your tires crunch louder than they should, and signed my name in the old trail register nailed to the post. One other person had signed in that week. It felt good. Solitary, but not completely abandoned. Around 2 hours in, I was deep enough that the road noise had faded. That's when the snow started. Not flurries, but thick, slanted snowfall that came in harder than expected. Within 20 minutes, it was full-on dumping. I stopped and pulled out my phone to check radar, but yeah, no signal. Should have expected that, really. That stretch is patchy, even in the best spots. I checked my map and figured I'd just push ahead to the shelter. It was only supposed to be another 2, maybe 2.5 miles. I'd get there, hunker down, and wait out the snow. I've done that before, sit it out, get some food in me, dry off, and sleep through the worst of it. But something shifted. I don't know exactly when it started to feel off, somewhere between recognizing a tree I'd already passed and realizing I couldn't see more than 30 feet in front of me. I picked up the pace, trying to beat the dark, but it felt like the trail was stretching. Like every time I should have been getting close, there was just more forest, more snow, more silence. Then came the part that really threw me. I stopped to take a breath near this old bent pine. It curved weird low to the ground, like it had started to grow sideways before correcting itself. I'd passed it earlier. I was sure of it. But somehow, it was in front of me again. I just stood there for a minute, hand on my thigh, trying to catch my breath and reason it out. Maybe there were two trees like that. Maybe I'd looped slightly and reconnected to the trail from a different point. I tried telling myself anything that sounded rational. That's when I heard the sound. One crunch. Just one. It came from behind me. Sharp, distinct, not a branch falling, not snow sliding off a tree. A step. A human step. I spun around so fast my boot slipped a little in the snow, but there was nothing. Just falling flakes in white space. I didn't wait to listen again. I started walking quick, deliberate steps. I didn't run, not yet, but my whole body felt wired. I wasn't hearing things. I know what a footstep sounds like, and that was it. As I moved, I kept catching these faint sounds behind me. Not constant, not rhythmic, just spaced out enough to make me question whether I was imagining them. I'd step, then a pause, then another crunch, always just after mine. I must have walked like that for nearly an hour, head turning at every sound, checking over my shoulder so often my neck hurt. I was wet by then. My gloves had soaked through. My thermos was long empty. I was moving mostly by instinct, trying to trust my gut that the shelter was close. Finally, I spotted it through the trees, a squat wooden lean-to, half covered in snow but still intact. Relief hit hard, like a drop in my chest. I pushed toward it without thinking. The inside was basic, a bench platform, slanted roof, back walls sealed up with logs. No door, no insulation, just something to keep the wind off. I ducked inside and dropped my pack on the bench. My fingers stung as I unzipped my jacket, half frozen, half just raw from the cold. I sat there, panting for a bit, trying to calm my pulse. That's when I noticed the warmth. It didn't make sense. The back wall, solid logs, same as the rest of the structure, felt warm. Like there was a heater behind it, not cold, actually warm, radiating heat. I pressed my palm flat against it and held it there. And then I heard this humming. Faint, low, not like wind, more like an idling engine, far off through walls. Except there weren't any walls except the one I was touching. I got up and stepped outside again, thinking maybe there was another hiker nearby. Maybe someone had built a fire just out of view. But when I looked around, the woods were empty, except for two shapes in the snow, maybe 10 yards out. At first, they looked like abandoned gear duffels or packs half buried. But as I got closer, I saw they were boots. Thick winter boots, attached to legs. I stopped cold. The snow came up to their waists. Two human figures, side by side, facing the shelter. No movement. No sign of how they got there. Their arms hung down straight, fingers barely visible. Their coats were zipped up tight, like they'd been dressed with care. The weirdest part? No snow on the shoulders, no footprints around them. Just smooth, untouched snow all the way to their knees. It was like someone had placed them there from above. I backed up, fast, turned around and ran straight back to the shelter. But when I stepped inside again, it was cold. That warmth was gone. The humming was gone. It was just a damp, frozen structure again. I didn't stick around. I grabbed my pack, didn't even zip it properly, and plunged down the hill in the opposite direction. I didn't care that it wasn't the trail. I just wanted out. I walked for, I don't even know. Time got weird. My legs started to go numb from the cold. My breathing was shallow, dry. Every branch I passed looked like the last one. But eventually, I hit a narrow fire road. a frozen, muddy cut through the woods. Then I saw headlights. A green Ranger truck came crawling up from the left. I waved like a lunatic until the driver slowed. When he rolled down the window, he didn't even ask what I was doing. He just looked me up and down and said, "You come down from the ridge?" I nodded. He looked down at my boots, then back at my face. "See anything strange?" I didn't know what to say at first. Then I just started talking. I told him everything, what I heard, what I saw, what I thought I saw, the shelter, the boots, the heat in the wall. I wasn't trying to make it sound dramatic. I just said it the way it happened. He didn't say anything for a while, just stared through the windshield like he was thinking hard. Then he told me to get in. He cranked the heat all the way up, and we drove in silence until we reached the ranger station. We'd only meant to be out there for one night. Nothing dramatic, just a winter hike to a spot called Harrow's View. People online swore it was better in the snow. My friend Marla found the trail on some outdoorsy blog, and we pieced the plan together over coffee the day before. That morning was cold but clear. Marla drove us up in her clunky old Subaru, heater barely doing anything. There were 3 of us, me, Marla, and her cousin Jordan, who'd driven in from Indiana to visit for the long weekend. I hadn't met him before, but he seemed cool. Quiet but friendly. The kind of guy who says, "Right on," unironically. We hit the trail just after noon. The first stretch was easy. Quiet, sure, but nothing strange. The trees were bare, the ground was stiff with frost, and the path wound along the ridge in these slow, careful curves. Every so often, we passed old wooden trail markers. The paint faded to ghostly letters. Someone had carved initials into one of them years ago. RH plus MN 2007. About halfway up, the first flurry started. Marla pointed them out, kind of smiling. "Perfect timing," she said. Couldn't have asked for better vibes. Honestly, it was pretty nice at first. The snow was light, the air still. It made everything feel softer somehow, quieter, like walking through a muted film. By the time we got to the overlook, though, it had picked up. The snowflakes were bigger, heavier, falling fast. The kind that stick to your hair and melt down your neck. We didn't stay long, maybe 5 minutes. Jordan snapped a photo and showed it to us. It was just fog and his own blurry face. I remember thinking how still everything felt. The quiet had changed. Not peaceful anymore. Just off, like the world had turned down the volume and forgotten to turn it back up. We headed back down. It started subtle. The trail, which had been obvious the whole way up, started to blur. One second we were walking on packed dirt. The next it was just white. The path disappeared under a thin, even layer of snow. Then the trees seemed to close in. I kept looking for the next marker, but it never came. Then I realized I couldn't hear the others. No footsteps, no chatter. I stopped walking, turned in a slow circle. Marla had been right behind me. Jordan too. But now, nothing. Just trees and snow, and silence. I shouted Marla's name. No echo. No response. The wind picked up at just the wrong moment and made my voice sound like it came from somewhere else. I pulled out my phone. No bars. 5% battery. Classic. I turned it off and tried to calm myself down. Panic wasn't going to help. I figured maybe they were ahead of me somehow, or I drifted off the trail without noticing. It didn't feel possible, but it was the only explanation that made any sense. That's when I saw the footprints. Not mine, someone else's. Fresh in the snow ahead of me. Not deep boot prints, but flat-bottom ones, like worn sneakers. At first, I thought maybe Jordan had doubled back or circled around. Maybe I'd just gotten turned around. So I followed them. The footprints didn't stay on the trail. They veered left, down into the thicker woods. Way off course. I should have stopped, I know that. But there's something weird about being alone in the woods like that. You start to feel like movement is the only thing keeping you safe. Stillness becomes a threat, so I kept going. The trees got closer together, the snow deeper. The prints were still clear. Then something changed. There weren't just sneaker prints anymore. Beside them was another set barefoot. but not right. The toes were too long, spaced strangely, and the prints were deep, like whatever made them was dragging weight or sinking with every step. I stood there a long time, just staring at them. Then I turned around, but the way I'd come was gone. No trail, no prints, nothing. The snow behind me was smooth, untouched. That's when the panic really hit. I started walking again, fast, not caring which direction. Just away, from the prints, from whatever was making them. After a while, I saw a structure through the trees. It looked like a ranger's hut. Wooden walls, slanted tin roof. One window boarded up, the other coated in grime. The door hung crooked on its hinges, like someone had forced it open more than once. I didn't question it. I ran straight there. Inside, it was bare. A bench against the wall. A couple of rusted tools. An old log in the fireplace, half burned and cold. No signs of life, no warmth, but it was shelter. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. My hands were shaking. I could feel sweat cooling on the back of my neck despite the cold. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the snow. Not one person, several, crunching slowly, moving in sync. They stopped just outside the hut. I held my breath. The door shifted, not from anyone pushing it, but like it was slowly bowing under pressure. The boards creaked, the hinges groaned. I looked through the crack in the boarded window. Nothing. Just snow and trees. Then came the tapping. Not on the door, on the wall, the side of the building. Light, careful taps, like someone brushing their fingers across the wood. They moved around the hut, one side, then the back, then the other side. Always moving, never rushing. I sat on the floor and pulled my knees to my chest, listened, counted in my head. When I got to 83, the tapping stopped. Silence again. After maybe 10 more minutes, I opened the door just a crack. Nothing. No people. No movement. But there were new footprints. The barefoot ones. They circled the hut. One full loop, then stopped. Dead in the snow, mid-stride. No signs of turning around or walking away. Just stopped. Then I heard my name. It was Jordan's voice. But it came from the wrong side of the hut, not the trail. From deep in the trees. He said it like a question, like he wasn't sure it was mine. I didn't answer. I waited until the light started to go gray, then took out my flashlight and started walking downhill. No path, just downhill. It took over an hour, but eventually I hit gravel. They found me near the road just before 9 that night. I was covered in ice, my clothes stiff, barely able to speak. Marla and Jordan had made it back hours earlier and called for help when I didn't show up. I told the search team I got lost. I didn't mention the hut. Later, I looked, searched maps, called the park office. Nothing like that hut exists up there. Nothing supposed to be built anywhere off that trail. That was 2 winters ago. I haven't hiked since. It was late February, somewhere near Rockburn, Tennessee, a quiet town tucked along one of those less traveled stretches of the Appalachian Trail. I'd been hiking solo for 3 days by then. Nothing extreme, just moderate miles during the day and sleeping in a small pop-up tent at night. A friend of mine was working on a guidebook, trying to cover the lesser documented offshoots of the trail. She needed someone to do the legwork, literally. And I happened to like hiking more than sitting at a desk. So I offered to take notes, log some landmarks, check for missing signage. It was casual. No deadlines. Just a long walk in the woods with a notebook and a vague sense of purpose. That third afternoon, things started to go sideways. I'd been moving for a few hours when I noticed the light shift. At first, I thought it was just the sun dipping behind a ridge, but the change was more gradual than that, like someone was dimming the world one notch at a time. I looked up. The sky had clouded over without me realizing it, and soon enough, snow started falling. At first it was light and kind of peaceful. Then it started coming down, harder, thicker flakes, less visibility. I couldn't see the trail markers anymore, and the wind picked up just enough to sting. My gloves were already damp from earlier, and my boots started to feel heavier with each step. I had passed an old ranger outpost maybe half a mile back, just a boarded-up cabin really, but I didn't want to double back and risk losing more daylight. I stopped on a slope, squinting down into a narrow valley, and spotted something in the distance. A structure, faint gray against the trees, almost hidden between two pine ridges. It didn't look new. Honestly, it didn't look particularly safe either, but it looked like shelter, and right then, that was enough. The snow was clinging to everything by the time I made it to the cabin. My jacket zipper had frozen stiff, and the straps on my pack were rimmed with ice. The place was small, maybe 15 feet across, and made of weathered wood that looked more gray than brown. The door wasn't locked, just looped with a chain that hadn't even been latched, just wrapped around the handle once. I knocked, waited, nothing. So I opened the door and stepped inside. It was warmer than I expected. Not toasty, just not frozen, like someone had been there recently. And there was a faint hum in the background, like a small appliance running somewhere out of sight. The interior was a single open room, one cot along the wall, an old camping stove near the center, a half-collapsed table leaning against a support beam. A metal pail sat under a slow leak from the roof. It looked abandoned but used, if that makes sense. No food, no bags, no coat hanging on the wall, just stripped-down essentials. I figured it might have been a hunting shack, or maybe some kind of firewatch station from decades ago. I took off my boots, wrung out my socks, and spread them out near the stove, even though it was stone cold. I checked my phone. No signal, not even a flicker. I figured I'd just wait out the snow, maybe sleep a few hours on the cot, and head back in the morning once visibility improved. I sat down and flipped through my notebook for a bit, thinking about how I'd describe this place, probably as marginally sketchy but life-saving. Then the hum stopped. It didn't click off. I just noticed all at once that it was gone, and the silence felt weirdly heavy. I assumed maybe whatever old generator or appliance had been running finally kicked it. But then I heard something else. Not the hum. Something softer, movement. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was definitely not nothing. I stood up and looked around again. There were no other rooms. No second floor, no basement hatch, not even a closet. I crouched and looked under the cot. Nothing, just damp boards. I told myself it was wind, or old wood shifting as it settled. It was an old building after all, maybe an animal under the foundation. That felt reasonable. But then, a few minutes later, it came again. This time, it was breathing. Soft, steady, and rhythmic, like someone trying to stay calm. Not panting, not hiding, just there. I stood still for a long time, barely breathing myself. The sound didn't go away. I turned my head slowly, trying to pinpoint the source. It was coming from behind the wall, the one with the leaky roof and the pail on the floor. That made no sense. I'd walked around the cabin. That was the back wall. There was nothing behind it but snow and trees. I walked over, knelt, and pressed my ear to the wood. I heard shifting, slow, deliberate, like someone repositioning themselves. I backed away. Fast. I didn't panic, not yet. But I knew I wanted out of there. I threw on my socks and boots, didn't even care that they were still wet. My hands were shaking enough that it took me 2 tries to get the laces tied. That's when I noticed something by the stove that made my stomach drop. A dehumidifier. I hadn't really looked at it before. It hadn't been making any noise when I came in. Just looked like another old, broken-down appliance. But now, there was a small light glowing on the side, the one that says the tank's full. I frowned and opened the tray. It was empty, completely dry, which meant someone had emptied it. Recently, probably within the last hour. My hand went straight for the door handle. It didn't move. The chain was still unlatched, but the door felt stuck. Not locked. Jammed. Like it had been wedged shut from the outside. My heartbeat ramped up fast. I grabbed the handle with both hands and yanked. Nothing. Just a dull creak. I turned to the window, tried to scrape some of the grime away with my sleeve. I couldn't see anything. The snow outside had thickened into a wall of white. Then I heard it again, not breathing this time, something closer, more distinct. Fabric, shifting, like someone turning slowly in place. I turned fast, ready to see whoever or whatever was behind me. But the room was the same cot, same stove, same broken table. But I could feel it, something was there, not hiding, just there, standing somewhere I wasn't looking directly at. I grabbed the metal pail and slammed it against the door frame. The chain broke on the second hit. I shoved the door open with my shoulder, slipped in the snow, and ran like hell. I didn't stop running until I saw the ranger outpost again.